Madam Speaker, I guess the political left doesn't want to defund the police anymore. Speaker, this summer I was at a friend's party and I met a young couple who were in the process of making dramatic last-minute changes to their wedding plans. This couple had been planning to get married in the beautiful century-old Catholic church that was the heart and soul of the community of Morinville, Alberta. It was the church in which she had grown up. And yet this church had been burned to the ground a few weeks before in a likely act of arson, protest, and terror. Morinville is about a 45-minute drive from where I live. And on the morning after that fire, I had driven out to see the situation. When I got there, the fire was still burning. While I watched, local fire crews had to do the painful work of knocking down parts of the structure in order to preserve public safety and avoid the risk of further spread. In addition to the threat of a burning building, there was also a gas line under the church and apartments nearby. So although no one was hurt in this attack, the additional risk of an explosion to human life was very, very significant. This violent and dangerous act in Morinville was not an isolated incident. In the summer of last year, acts of arson destroyed more than a dozen churches of various denominations, with innumerable other acts of vandalism or attempted violence happening as well. The Prime Minister answered a question for media about what happened in Morinville, but did not proactively issue a single statement about this wild rampage of destruction in Western Canada. The Prime Minister's close friend and former advisor, Jerry Butts, called these acts understandable. Now, 2 days ago, there was an extremely violent attack on a Coastal GasLink pipeline worksite in BC. The responding RCMP officers were blocked from entering this road by spiked boards, downed and tarred stumps and trees lit on fire, and then had smoke bombs and flaming sticks thrown at them. Meanwhile, additional violent protesters broke into the worksite armed with axes and flare guns. These protesters toppled heavy machinery, cut fuel lines, and smashed and set site vehicles on fire, with the workers still inside. About this incident, the public safety minister said, quote, "I am deeply concerned to hear reports of violent confrontations at a work site." Now, to this minister, respectfully, this wasn't a matter of violent confrontations. This was a premeditated, violent attack on working people who were just trying to do their jobs. So what is the climate in which such acts of violence against places of worship and against energy workers has come to take place here in Canada? The much venerated David Suzuki has said that pipelines will be blown up. The current sitting Minister of the Environment in this Liberal government once attacked the home of Alberta's then Premier Ralph Klein. He climbed on the roof of their private home as part of an activist stunt, apparently terrifying the Premier's wife, who was home alone at the time. Other members of this House, including the former leader of the Green Party, the former NDP MP who is now the Mayor of Vancouver, have been arrested for more benign acts of law-breaking. Now, Madam Speaker, I believe in the rule of law. The rule of law means that everyone is equally bound by law and protected by law, whether they are sitting in a protest camp on Wellington Street or sitting in the federal cabinet, whether they drive a truck to work or work in the federal public service, whether they belong to a populist pro-Trump movement or a democratic socialist climate alarmist movement. Such people have an obligation to follow the law and also have a right to protection by it. When the law is selectively applied to penalize people based on their political views, that is, by definition, a violation of the rule of law. So while calling out illegal blockades of critical infrastructure and other forms of law-breaking by protesters, we must also acknowledge that the rule of law is being threatened by a government that is woefully inconsistent in the way that they treat protesters, and that inconsistency is based on the political preferences and the biases of the people in power. And this brings the law into disrepute. At the heart of the idea of the rule of law is a contract. I will follow the law, and I will have the protection of law. When people are told to follow the law, but don't have the fair and equal protection of law, then we are no longer speaking of rule of law, but of rule by law. Rule of law is where the law rules. Rule by law is where laws are used by powerful people to dominate others. So we need to appreciate the difference. When the Oka crisis, 9/11, violent G7 and G20 protests, the blockades of 2 years ago, a series of attacks on places of worship, and violence targeting energy workers were not cause for the use of emergency powers. And then when this hammer is used to target working people engaged in civil disobedience in response to unjustified and unscientific vaccine mandates, when this happens, what we see is that the contract at the heart of what it means to be a rule of law society seems to be fraying. If I had seen the church I was about to get married in burned to the ground, if I had lost my job or access to vital services because of vaccine mandates, if I had seen acts of lawlessness ignored, defended, and even perpetrated by senior leaders in this country, then I would find it a little bit rich for the government to say that the current situation constitutes a unique national emergency. The contract at the heart of a rule of law society is fraying when we see a prime minister with an incredible personal record of corruption, the only prime minister in history to violate ethics law on multiple occasions, now claiming that other people should be subject to severe and disproportionate consequences for so much as donating to the convoy even weeks before any blockading began. Now, it seems to me that the most important question for Canada today is not just about the particulars of this moment, but it's about how did we get here? We got here because of the arbitrary and inconsistent application of decisions by the government, the demonization of people who disagree, and the decline of our democratic institutions, leading people to believe that their voice cannot be heard any other way. If we're going to come together as a country and address the pain and division that has been sown, then we have to ask ourselves, why the voice of a mother crying because her son lost his business and died by suicide because of COVID restrictions is not heard as loudly as the sound of a horn honking on Wellington Street? Why is it that a community of refugees from Egypt who had their house of worship burned to the ground in Surrey last year couldn't even get a statement from the Prime Minister, but potential for violence from this convoy led to a national state of emergency? We have to address the lack of empathy that clearly permeates our halls of power and the lack of concern for working Canadians who have lost jobs and opportunity as a result of pandemic policies, as well as the broader attacks on their livelihood that we are seeing through government policy. Now, Madam Speaker, it may be hard for some people here to fully understand what many Canadians are going through, but I ask you all to spare a thought for people like the NDP leader's brother-in-law. The NDP leader might not be prepared to stand up for his brother-in-law, but I will be here to stand in the breach. Mr. Dhaliwal donated $13,000 to the Freedom Convoy. After the fact, according to an NDP source, Mr. Dhaliwal has asked for his money back. This NDP source conveniently claims that there had been a misunderstanding about the true nature of the organization, which sounds like the sort of thing an NDP source would say. But regardless, let's take the NDP source at their word and suppose that Mr. Dhaliwal, who is the NDP leader's brother-in-law, donated as a result of a misunderstanding. Perhaps he accidentally clicked on the wrong GoFundMe page. Perhaps he donated $13,000 before he had had a chance to read the description. Let's say it's entirely true, and let's say that Mr. Dhaliwal wasn't the only one. I'm sure there are many everyday Canadians, just like Mr. Dhaliwal, who have donated to the convoy for various reasons, because they oppose mandates, because they are concerned about the impact on supply chains, because they want to show support for truckers, or because of some sort of misunderstanding. I don't want Mr. Dhaliwal to have to worry about his bank account being frozen without a court order because of these emergency measures. The NDP might no longer be prepared to stand up for workers, for civil liberties, and for members of the NDP leader's own family, but Conservatives are prepared to step up when the NDP have let their own people down. And my colleagues have pointed out that the NDP and the Liberals are becoming almost exactly alike. But I do see one clear difference, because unlike the NDP leader, we know that the Prime Minister has a track record of doing a great deal to defend the financial interests of his family. Now, Mr. Speaker, in spite of the challenges we face, I am much more optimistic of the future of our country than I was 3 or 4 months ago. The convoy movement, with its complex cast of characters, with the presence of a few unsavory individuals, and with tens of thousands of people working for an end to mandates and a return to normal life. The convoy movement has led to a renewed interest in political involvement and participation within my constituency and across the country. It has inspired more Canadians to stand up for peace, order, and good government. Last night, I held a virtual town hall on short notice to discuss the Emergencies Act. There were over 300 participants, plus their family members and spouses. The message was overwhelming in confirming my decision to vote no. But participants also asked many good questions about how our democratic process works, how to influence change, and how they can get involved. Canadians do not want division, and they do not want lawlessness. They want a restoration of the rule of law through ordinary and lawful means, whereby both citizens and leaders respect human rights and follow the law, whereby the law is applied equally to all, regardless of their political views or status. They want an end to the mandates, and they want public health policies that are based on science. They want the ability to work and raise a family. Madam Speaker, the next convoy will not be a protest convoy, it will be a voters convoy. After this weekend, people will turn their attention towards learning about and engaging in the democratic process to defeat this divisive government and their NDP allies, and replace them with a government that will defend freedom, opportunity, and yes, the rule of law. God keep our land glorious.